Hi, this is John Harcher, and welcome to episode 9 of Keep On Groovin'. Jimi Hendrix's family gains control over his catalog and will be able to shape future releases to enhance his legacy. How would they do? 1997 would be the first time the public would get a chance to see their plans for his seemingly ongoing career. Episode 9, The Experience Hendrix Era, 1997 to 1999. After almost 25 years, the rights to Jimmy's music and posthumous career were back in the hands of his family. Not that they were 100% sure what to do, because very few people would know how to handle a situation like this. At the time, and even now, probably Elvis Presley was one of the few people who had a career after death that needed to be handled in such an active manner. Jimmy's age 27 death mates, Janice and Jim, would be two others, just not quite as extensive. Things with the Hendrix catalog tape library were a bit of a mess. There were still missing tapes, missing film. Jimmy's image and name would sometimes pop up in places that weren't 100% signed off on, so things needed to be brought under control. Al's stepdaughter Janie wound up being the point person for the new company, and she wisely brought Eddie Kramer back on board to help straighten things out. They began to sort out what they had, what they were missing, and then began to track things down. In some cases, people generously offered what they had. In other cases, they had to pay. There's a story about one case in particular where it didn't take much work at all. The missing master tapes for Banded Gypsies had been an issue for years. Somebody finally thought of going to Capitol and checking their library to see if they'd been misfiled. Well, it turns out they hadn't been misfiled. They went, checked under H, and there they were. They've been there all along. Nobody actually looked. Now, that may not 100% be the true story, but it's probably close enough. Experience Hendrix's first job would be to reissue the core catalog again, but this time from the best possible sources and back to their original covers. They did the right thing and kept Alan's revamped 17-track version of Are You Experienced, but left the other two, or three if you count Smash Hits, the same as their original release. They also did an episode of VH1's Classic Albums program focusing on Electric Ladyland, which was released in 2008 on DVD as At Last the Beginning, which is the alternate name of the album opener in The Gods Made Love. To go along with these, they put out a new greatest hits package entitled Experience Hendrix. In another wise move, as I mentioned last episode, they kept the blues album from 1994 in print. They just tweaked the one song title and toned down Michael Fairchild's somewhat trippy liner notes. They also had some of their work done for them in 1995. Capitol Records finally got around to putting out a CD of Banded Gypsies for the first time. A few years later, Experience Hendrix teamed with them to put out a remastered edition from those better tapes I just mentioned, along with several vinyl reissues over the years. So with all of that out of the way, it was time for them to tackle the tough job once again, putting together their version of the fourth album. First Rays of the New Rising Sun. Finally, on April 22nd, 1997, after more than 25 years, Jimmy's concept of a double album would finally be coming to light. Eddie Kramer got in touch with Mitch Mitchell again, and they went over the tracks from Cry of Love, Rainbow Bridge, and War Heroes. There's something missing there. To try to find the best songs to go on the album. For the most part, they got it right, but at the same time, they went too far and not far enough. I'll try to explain when we're done. The songs on this album are back to the original mixes that came out in the 70s, so no need to go into each track individually, except in a couple of cases here and there. They're all talked about in episodes 1 and 3. Please check them out if you haven't yet. I'll try to break down the album and do it in 4 sides. Side 1 of the album starts off with Freedom, just like it was on Cry of Love. As I mentioned, same mix and all, but with a really bad crackle towards the beginning. Somebody didn't do a good job mastering there. Next up is Isabella, the War Heroes version. To me, it doesn't fit as a side one song, let alone second, but that's where they put it. Nightbird Flying is next, just fine where it is. This is followed by Angel. Again, not really a side one song to me, and actually kind of a clunky fit following Nightbird Flying. Side one ends with Room Full of Mirrors, as Cry of Love was originally intended to do. Dolly Dagger starts off side two. I actually would have had it start off side one. That's just me. Easy Rider is next. There was actually a mastering flaw on the first version where the first little bit of Buddy's drum intro was cut off. It finally got corrected in 2010. That's followed by Drifting, and album one ends with Beginning. In general, this goes along with the 3-album side memo with a change here or there. Like, for example, I think Beginning was on side 3, and they put it at the end of side 2 here, but it worked out. Album 2 starts off with Stepping Stone, the Mitch version. This is followed by My Friend, Straight Ahead, and ends with Hey Baby. Now, that song really belongs on side 4 someplace. And I'm not sure My Friend should really be here either. I think I know why, though. I'll get to that in a minute. Side 4 kicks off with Earth Blues, followed by Astroman, In From the Storm, and ends like Cry of Love did with Belly Button Window. Now, if they'd stuck with just the songs recorded in late 1969 through 1970, like that era, I think it would have made a solid 16-track album, 4 songs on the side. But thanks to the Voodoo Soup debacle, I have to believe that somewhere inside, they felt kind of a responsibility to bring Cry of Love back into print. So all 10 songs from that album are included here, while 4 from Rainbow Bridge and 3 from War Heroes also make the cut. 17 is a really odd number for a track listing, kind of like 11 for the old Capitol Beatles records. By adding My Friend, they still left the album under 70 minutes, which is room for at least one more track. They could have added Look Over Yonder if they weren't restricting themselves to the Electric Lady tracks. They could have added Bleeding Heart to side 4, or used one of the 2 summer 1970 tracks from Loose Ends. By putting on that one extra track in My Friend, it felt more incomplete than it would have been without it. Plus, there would be a perfect home for it by the end of the year. If I was going to go with the 16 songs, here's how I would have arranged it. Side 1, you start with Dolly Dagger, follow it with Nightbird Flying, Room Full of Mirrors, and then end with Freedom. Side 2, Easy Rider, Drifting, Astroman, and Straight Ahead. Side 3 would be Stepping Stone, Beginning, In From the Storm, and Angel. And then side 4, Earth Blues, Isabella, Hey Baby, and Belly Button Window. Now this is okay. I put a playlist together and then listened to it. It sounds good, but it still feels a little too short. I think it really needs to include 18 to 20 songs to feel complete. But at least we got these tracks back into wide circulation. That's like the main positive. And it did better than Voodoo Soup, making it all the way to number 49 in the US. Around the same time that the Core 3 and First Rays hit the shops, the new Best Of collection arrived. Experienced Hendrix would try to supplant smash hits, Essential Jimi Hendrix, and Ultimate Hendrix as the go-to compilation. It doesn't have Are You Experienced, has more songs from Axis than Electric Ladyland, and only has the Star Spangled Banner as a live song. I guess they did okay, but it's still not totally comprehensive. Even though it only hit number 133 on the charts, it's actually been a steady seller, and eventually it ended up going gold. South Saturn Delta. Less than 6 months after First Rays came out, we got a follow-up CD entitled South Saturn Delta. Think of it as Loose Ends 1997 with higher quality material. I have to think when they left songs off of First Rays, this release was already in mind to fill in the holes to calm everybody's nerves. The album starts off with Look Over Yonder, the original version from Rainbow Bridge, making a welcome return. Next up is Little Wing. It's an instrumental take recorded during the Axis sessions that's musically Angel. As I mentioned earlier, for whatever reason, Jimmy decided to call another song Little Wing and put this aside. But not for long. Next, for the first time, we get a studio version of the concert staple Loverman. This one was recorded during the TTG sessions in October 1968 and is a mix of two different takes. Jimmy introduces the song as Here He Comes, though goes into a wild Killing Floor-esque type intro. This was then spliced onto a later version where Jimmy does a little scatting at the end. It's pretty representative of how the song was at that point in 1968. Next up is the title track, South Saturn Delta. This is the complete take from June 1968 with Jimmy and the horn section. The radio show included less than 3 minutes of it. It's too bad there hadn't been any place for it either on Electric Ladyland or even a later release. It's too good of a track to have sat in the vaults this long. Power of Soul follows. Oh, cool. We finally get a full version of this song to go along with Message of Love from Voodoo Soup. Well, not exactly. This version is a full 2 minutes longer than the one on Crash Landing and has a lot more lyrics, but not all of them. It'll do in a pinch if you wanted to make a Band of Gypsies album. Next up is Message to the Universe. It's a shame they didn't do Message of Love and Power of Soul together, but this will have to do. This is the Woodstock band version, so calling it Message to the Universe, which is what it was actually called at the time, to differentiate it from the Band of Gypsies version is fine. It's a pretty good idea. Tax Free is next. The studio version from War Heroes makes its return as well. All Along the Watchtower is next. This version is an earlier mix by Chaz Chandler without a lot of the enhancements the later album and single version has. It's sparser and more compact sounding. Next is The Stars That Play with Laughing Sam's Dice. For the first time in the US after 30 years, the B-side from Burning of the Midnight Lamp finally makes its Hendrix album debut. This is the stereo mix Eddie prepared for War Heroes, but Mike Jeffrey pulled off to put on loose ends to end up not being released in the United States. We've been over that. Now, after making its return 2 years earlier on Voodoo Soup, Midnight is back here. This time it goes back to its War Heroes incarnation, 30 seconds shorter, but with all the cool effects restored. Next is Sweet Angel. The song makes its second appearance on the album in an instrumental version. This one was recorded after Access Bold as Love was finished and released and all. Jimmy did it with an early click machine to keep time. The version on here fades in due to some damage to the tape. However, a few years later, they were either able to restore it or found another copy because the full song appears on the 2000 box set. Another song from War Heroes, Bleeding Heart, returns here as well. As I mentioned, it probably could have fit on a first raise a little better. Another track that was just on Voodoo Soup, Paley Gap, is next. This one returns to its full-ish version, 20 seconds longer, but fades out at the end like it did on Rainbow Bridge. Like I said, I wish they maybe would have found a way to edit the ending of that onto this one, but I had to do that myself. Now, another song from Loose Ends makes the cut here, just not in the same version. Drifter's Escape is the same version here that appeared on the radio show, mixed by Jimmy on August 22nd, even though it says previously unreleased alternate mix. However, experienced Hendrix may have an out for that. In a recent discussion on the Hoffman boards, Poster Croscat mentioned that he has live and unreleased the European version. He said the mix of Drifter's Escape on that album is different than the one on Lifelines. The one on Lifelines is indeed the one on South Saturn Delta, but the other one is completely different. He thinks it's one of the ones that's floating out there on bootlegs. So if you bought this album in Europe, it would be correct in that case. I guess it's how you view things, as someone once said, from a certain point of view. As I said, I actually like John Jansen's mix better, but now people in the US could easily get their hands on a version of this song. The album ends with Midnight Lightning. This version isn't the original take Alan Douglas overdubbed back in 1975. This is Jimmy solo in March of 1970, playing it really old style. Solo, no effects, and tapping his foot along like John Lee Hooker. All in all, it's a nice collection. over an hour's worth of material, and it filled in almost all the gaps from Rainbow Bridge and War Heroes. I would have included My Friend on this album. It would have made a good balance of two 16-track albums. So if you wanted to go back and recreate the old posthumous records, you could do Cry of Love completely, and will be one song short for Rainbow Bridge, unless you wanted to use the Star Spangled Banner from the British Best of Collection Cornerstones to fill the gap. They were two songs short for War Heroes, and that is counting Highway Child on Audio Experience. But one of these would make it out as a single in another year or two. As I mentioned on the holiday show, that would be Three Little Bears. Loose Ends was, and to this day still is, unavailable either by itself or pieced together from individual releases. So after this first year of albums old and new, there were a lot of things available to the public once again, and a lot more was yet to come. So this brings us up to 1998. The next part of this episode and the following 2 or 3 episodes are going to overlap a little bit thanks to Dagger Records, which acts as a thread basically from the beginning of the Experience Hendrix era all the way through the, spoiler, Sony acquisition. I'm skipping over the first 1 or 2 releases they did now, but I'll go back and do all of them when I do Dagger in full in a couple episodes. So with the core catalog now including a version of the 4th album all set, Experience Hendrix looked to expand the catalog even further. They didn't need to look far. A lot of work had already been done for them by Mike Jeffrey and Alan Douglas. They just needed to try and do it a little better. The next 3 releases are similar to First Rays and the Experience Hendrix Best of in this sense. They look to go back and correct the mistakes of previous compilers, either Jeffrey or Douglas. Their heart was in the right place, but in each case, they almost got it right, but frustratingly dropped the ball in their own ways. BBC sessions. First up in June of 1998 was a reissue of the BBC sessions that were mostly represented on Radio 1 with the exception of a couple of songs. Those 2 songs are here, so this 2-disc set does take the place of that album in that respect. In the 10 years between Radio 1 and this release, everyone got in on the BBC Sessions bandwagon, so it was a no-brainer to return it to wide release. But they made a few mistakes in my opinion. They once again did not have the songs grouped by sessions, but scattered around. The one exception is the Alexis Corner Rhythm and Blues program from mid-October. Those 3 songs are back to back to back, including Alexis's inter-song banter, but not all, which is another annoyance. Back in the early 90s, when WNEW was still WNEW, they aired a program on Hendrix's BBC sessions where they aired them in order and with as much inter-song talking as was available. I taped the whole thing, and good thing I did. The track on this album, entitled Alexis Corner Introduction, has the phrase, "with another 15 minutes of rhythm and blues," edited out. Was this because of a deal with the BBC to not release the complete programs? Was it done to make the CD flow smoother? Funny thing is, right after this, you have not 1, but 2 songs with Brian Matthews talking over the intro, Fire and the not on Radio 1 Little Miss Lover. There's also a cool promo for Top of the Pops in October from the radio show that has Little Miss Lover running underneath. Disc 2 has most of the new stuff. It starts out with the Complete Purple Haze from March with Brian's intro. Midway through the disc, it has 2 jams with another BBC guest who sat in on drums, Stevie Wonder. Yes, that Stevie Wonder. He's a multi-instrumentalist, you know. The first part is just a jam, but the second part is based on Stevie's I Was Made to Love Her, or just the little outro riff of the verses, you know, da 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 da. You know, that's cool, but even more interesting is the part not included on the disc. As the I Was Made to Love Her section ends, Stevie starts clicking the snare drum and singing out the words to Ain't Too Proud to Beg. The band then does a minute or so of the Motown classic. I'm guessing they cut it out for royalty purposes. Too bad. After that, we begin the alternate take session. For some reason, in between the breakdown Foxy Lady from Live and Unreleased and Hey Joe, which actually isn't an alternate, they just faded it early, they include the intro to Hey Joe that was broadcast for the January show. Why isn't it on disc 1 with the broadcast version? Next is Manic Depression from the TV show Late Night Lineup from April, the only song surviving from that appearance. Then they have the alternates of Driving South and Hear My Train A-Comin' that appeared back in 1988, but only on a little CD single for Day Tripper from Radio 1. The disc concludes with the famous, or infamous, incident at a happening for Lulu in early January 1969. The band played Voodoo Child, then the plan was for them to do Hey Joe with Lulu joining in for the second verse. The band started out with a wild Winterland type intro for Hey Joe, then kicked into the song with Jimmy's low E string in desperate need of retuning. Then, right as Lulu began to head onto the stage, Jimmy stopped the song, announced they were done with this rubbish, and was going to dedicate a song to the Cream, namely Sunshine of Your Love. They were having so much fun, they played up until the very last second of the broadcast with the director trying to get them to stop. Afterwards, Mitch Mitchell remembers some BBC official coming over to them and saying, "Well, you'll never work for the BBC again." And you know what? We never did. A 2010 reissue from Sony included a bonus track, a TV version of Burning of the Midnight Lamp, where the band sang over top of an instrumental track. There was another Burning of the Midnight Lamp from TV that turned up later where the band played over a backing track of another song. I would love to know the reason why practically none of the BBC releases from any artist don't go by session. Like First Raised, it's a situation of too much and not enough. If you're going to include some of the intro material or not include all of it, it's not going to change the flow of the album that much. But all in all, it's an improvement to an already good album, though the main issue fans seem to have with it is it's done in fake stereo. That's the modern sound, I guess. Live at the Fillmore East. Jimmy played the Fillmore East a few times with the Experience, but most famously is where he did the Band of Gypsies concerts. This 2-disc set from February 1999 acts as a real sequel to the album in comparison to Band of Gypsies 2. They even use the same font style when putting the name Hendrix on the cover. As I mentioned, the original album had been released on CD back when the first group of releases came out in 1997, thanks to the discovery of the original tapes right where they were left in 1970. It's believed the songs here were taken from the mixed down tapes Jimmy and Eddie were using to create the original album, so some of this may have Jimmy's handiwork involved after all. This new album has different versions of 4 of the 6 songs from the first album, an alternate edit of a 5th, no alternate message of love, though we get one eventually, and better sounding versions of 2 of the 3 tracks on Band of Gypsies 2. Like Message of Love, the 3rd would show up later as well. The set starts off with the first song from the last show, an up-tempo reworking of Stone Free based on his re-recording from the previous April. Like the version for Royal Albert Hall, the band stretched it to well over 12 minutes. Buddy's cement mixer drumming works solidly on this song. Power of Soul is next. This track is one of several included on this package that are also on the black and white video from the first set on January 1st. It's a little more complete compared to the one from the Band of Gypsies album, since it includes Buddy's drum break before they kick into the vocal part of the song. Hear My Train A-Comin' follows. The version that might have appeared on the original album is finally available from the original tapes instead of wherever they got it for Band of Gypsies 2. It's probably among the top 5 versions of the song Jimmy ever did. Next is Isabella. The only recorded time the Band of Gypsies did this song is the first set on December 31st, and that's what's here, much more compact in comparison to the Woodstock version. Oddly, though, they decided not to include the machine gun that followed Isabella, but the one from the following night in the second set. The band performed Voodoo Child in the second set each night, but he keeps things a little slower, more like the album version. Disc 1 ends with a re-edit of We Got to Live Together, This is the same version that ends the Band of Gypsies album. It's just about 4 minutes longer, and it's still 6 minutes shorter than the original. Then we have disc two. As the clock struck midnight and Bill Graham chimed in the sounds of Guy Lombardo's orchestra during Old Lang Syne, the band kicked into their own version. They then segue into Who Knows, shorter here by 2/3 compared to the one from the next night, but turns out it was edited to this length. They'd actually recorded some Christmas music at their time at Baggy's, a medley of Little Drummer Boy, Silent Night, and Old Lang Syne. As we mentioned in the Christmas special, a 4 minute version of this was released to radio stations in the 70s and to the public in the 90s. Changes is next. This alternate version is from the first set on December 31st, and it's relatively compact even without editing. If they'd chosen the one from the video, it'd be almost 8 minutes long and include a lot of vamping. Machine Gun is next. Yes, Machine Gun again. The second version on this set is the longest of the four versions. This is from the second show on New Year's Eve. Stepping Stone was performed twice. The one on this set is from the first set on January 1st. It's a tough song to perform. No wonder why they didn't try Room Full of Mirrors at this point. The R&B cover Stop was the third release song Buddy would do lead vocals on, and they did it 3 out of the 4 sets, and possibly all 4. More on that in a later episode. This one is also from the first set on January 1st and was also on Band of Gypsies too. But this time, instead of the one from the video that ran out towards the end of the song, it's the full version from the mixed down tapes. Earth Blues was another song they performed 3 out of the 4 sets. It would have been nice to hear the one that's on the video that fades in, but this is from the final set on January 1st. Next is Burning Desire. The song Jimmy was never able to nail down in the studio sounds really good here. It's from January 1st, the first set, at least we think. Again, more about that in a later show. And to me, it's probably the best version he was ever able to do. Now, the band had some fun for their encores for the last show, bringing out Wild Thing, Hey Joe, and Purple Haze. Unfortunately, we only get Wild Thing here to finish off the set. Foxy Lady, the third song from Band of Gypsies 2, would eventually be released as a B-side a decade later. The black and white video was later released in full with a 5.1 soundtrack remix done by Eddie Kramer, as well as additional color footage from the night before. Other songs from the New Year's Eve shows would also make it out later, and eventually an entire Band of Gypsies at the Fillmore box came out, but that's 2 decades down the line. Live at Woodstock. Later in July 1999, and in plenty of time for the festival's 30th anniversary, Experienced Hendrix released Jimmy's entire set from Woodstock. Almost. Once again, poor Larry Lee got the shaft. His 2 songs, Mastermind and Gypsy Woman, didn't make the cut, and his solo from Red House got cut again, though more of his solo from Voodoo Child made it in this time around. Otherwise, it's the entire set in proper order, with several songs on disc 1 and the encore Hey Joe making their debut. They also put out a video that contained all the songs included on the album, as well as a black and white videotape shot from the side of the stage to cover some parts of the show the film crew was not able to get. They redid it in 2005 when some more footage showed up. Now, since it's almost all here, let me go over the full set, including the bits that were edited out. The band started out that early Monday morning with a new song, Message to Love, though at this point, it was more along the lines of Message to the Universe from South Saturn Delta. This is the first time it made an audio release, but the song was used as the opener of the Douglas-era Woodstock video release. A nearly 10-minute Hear My Train A-Comin' was next, followed by an extended Spanish Castle Magic and Red House. This was the first major instance of Larry Lee's contributions being edited out. As I mentioned in the previous segment on Woodstock, his playing was fine and pretty much in tune, so for this song, I don't think it was necessary. Larry's first vocal performance of the day, his own song Mastermind, would go here in the set. No, it wasn't perfectly performed, but it was frankly no different than a lot of other songs that day. A 1969 era Lover Man, Foxy Lady, and the live debut of Jam Back at the House, aka Beginning, finish off disc one. I believe Jam had a bit of editing done to it as well, this time to Mitch's solo. Disc 2 starts off with another new song, Isabella. Jimmy didn't end up performing the song after the Band of Gypsies shows, so this debut ended up being its longest performance, generally in line with the versions the band recorded a couple weeks later at the Hit Factory. Larry's other song, a cover medley of Curtis Mayfield's Gypsy Woman and Aware of Love, would go here. It's the weaker of his two lead vocals, but Jimmy does some nice work on it. Shame it didn't get wider release, or any release at all. Fire is next, back in its proper place in the set compared to the Douglas era opener on the previous CD. Then comes the grand finale, the half-hour musical tour de force that ranks as one of Jimmy's greatest moments, if you ask me. It starts off with one of the wickedest sounding versions of Voodoo Child he ever did, with the first 5 minutes of it added into the extended version of the Woodstock film. It's a great addition. The song wanders a little bit in the middle, and Larry's solo, which was a bit off key, kind of got some of it edited out here. But then he comes back with a bit of stepping stone / trying to be before ending the song slowly and with his teeth. From there, he goes into the Star Spangled Banner. Billy's mentioned in several interviews how you can hear him starting to play along with Jimmy and Mitch, but then he stepped back and just let him go, since he was going somewhere no one could really follow. Even though he'd done it for around a year on stage at that point, and would continue to do it through 1970, this was just the right song at the right moment, and in 3.5 minutes, it captured the mood of the era, both good and bad. As had become the standard over the past year, Purple Haze followed, and it's one of the best live versions, channeling the energy from the Star Spangled Banner and getting the lyrics right for the most part. The 5-minute improvisation is next, containing a few bits of Pride of Man, aka Bolero, before slowing everything down and going into Villanova Junction and probably its best live outing. After leaving the stage for a bit, Jimmy mentions the band would try Valleys of Neptune, but then calls it off and ends the day with Hey Joe. For those lucky 25,000 or so who hung around until Monday morning, they got to see 5 new songs with bits of 2 more thrown in, his 2 in-concert only staples, along with Larry's 2 songs. The band may certainly have been a bit ramshackle and not particularly tight in places, but it was one of the longest performances Jimmy ever did, somewhere in the 2-hour ballpark, and a very unique set list. For the 50th anniversary of Woodstock, a huge box was put together containing new mixes of practically every set, with one major exception. Experienced Hendrix insisted that their mix be used, edits and all. Andy Zax did a brand new mix of his own to go along with practically everything else. It would be nice to hear it someday. I've actually driven by the festival area a couple times, had to head up Route 17B on vacation, but I never got a chance to go there. At one point, we had an open day and ended up going to Costa's in the Poconos on Route 6 in Holy, Pennsylvania. The kids had a good time, so I'll just have to wait. And finally, to sum up our Woodstock segment, sadly, Michael Lang, the promoter who came up with the idea for the festival and got it together, passed away recently. He did something no one thought would work and created a cultural and historical landmark that still impacts us today. Not a bad day's work, or 3 days of fun and music and nothing but fun and music, but a lot of headaches for him. Rest in peace, Michael. So after 3 years, we'd gotten the 3 Experience albums, Band of Gypsies, Smash Hits, a proper attempt at the 4th album, sort of, an album of rarities, the BBC sessions, a real sequel to the Band of Gypsies, and most of the Woodstock set back in front of the public. You know what would be nice now? A nice big box set with a lot of new stuff. Luckily, that's just what they were thinking too. Next time, with the turn of the century, came a number of different compilations, including that long-awaited career-spanning box set, a best of with some rare and unreleased material, and a segment in a PBS show that would yield an album as well. That's next time on Keep On Groovin'. Please remember to hit the subscribe button if you like what you're hearing. You've heard me mention the January 23rd Band of Gypsy session a number of times. The date is also significant since it's my mother's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. Love you, and thanks for everything as always. I'm John Hartrar. Thanks for listening.